Hello, I'm Kevin Berger, author of Atheism is Untenable, a book in which I argue why skeptical atheism crumbles beneath its own weight. On this channel, I don't engage in apologetics. Instead, I apply the principles of polemics and skepticism to atheism and the claims made by atheists, of which, despite their claims to the contrary, there are many, including these, among others. This is Justified Nonetheless. If you enjoy or find my content interesting or informative, be sure to subscribe, turn on those notifications, like and share, and be sure to check out the Justified Nonetheless Patreon project for even more exclusive content. Hello again, my little tumbleweeds. You know, every once in a while, life surprises you with a special treat, and by happenstance, this occurred to me recently. You see, about a year ago, I was watching a debate between Matt Dillahunty and Zach Seckler of Adherent Apologetics that was hosted by the channel Theology Unleashed. And during that Q&A portion of that debate, I posed 4 questions to Matt. Now, I had completely forgotten about when and where these questions were asked, though I had a vague remembrance of his responses. And as luck would have it, not long ago, I stumbled upon the debate in question again, and there they were. So the questions and his responses to those questions are what we're going to be covering today in this video. So let's get right to it.
Realist is asking, since beliefs are neurological states, what empirical evidence is there to support the implied claim that a distinct neurological state of non-belief exists in reality? How could an absence of belief be substantiated at all?
Is that for me or is that for Matt?
I'm not even sure I understood what they were asking. One more time?
Yeah.
Can you see it on the... Oh, I guess you guys can't see it. Oh, I should change it so you can see the screen.
No.
If you're on YouTube, it appears up there. Since beliefs are neurological states, what empirical evidence is there to support the implied claim that a distinct neurological state of non-belief exists in reality? How could an absence of a belief be substantiated at all?
Okay. How could an absence of belief be substantiated at all? Belief is the state of being convinced of a proposition. You can either be convinced of a proposition or not convinced.
Here's the problem with that. When most people talk about being convinced of something, they mean to a certain degree of certainty, and typically a very high degree of certainty. Indeed, this is what is explained in the courtroom analogy. The standard is essentially beyond a reasonable doubt, right? Wrong. Belief is considering a proposition to be more likely to be true than untrue, and that metric is closer to the preponderance of evidence of a civil trial. If one considers either of a pair of dichotomous propositions, in this case, existence or non-existence, any more likely, that is belief. In other words, one can believe that something is true and still not be convinced that it's true.
Zach is convinced of the proposition some God exists. I am not convinced of that. I don't understand this question about distinct neurological state of non-belief.
That's strange because
a belief is essentially a brain state that accepts a proposition is likely true.
So Matt clearly agrees that belief is a neurological state. Therefore, surely he must understand that if non-belief in P is genuinely distinct from either belief in P or belief in the negation of P, there must be a distinct neurological state for each of those positions. This isn't a difficult concept to grasp.
It is simply a fact. I am not convinced of that. Just like if I believe that if I believe that when I let go of this bottle, it's going to fall down, I can't simultaneously believe that it's going to go up, or else I'm being irrational. But
agreed. That is the principle of non-contradiction. However, That does nothing whatsoever to address what seems to be a violation of the principle of the excluded middle. That being that one can find neither of a pair of dichotomous propositions to be any more likely than the other. Matt is also presuming rationality without any justification whatsoever. People believe all sorts of things that are irrational and unjustified. And we know this.
Rational. But I don't know that it matters if you can demonstrate a neurological state of non-belief. The fact...
Yes, it does matter, because it's an assertion, and what can be asserted without evidence can be dismissed without evidence. This is not an exception to that.
The fact is, I'm either convinced of something or I'm not. And I don't even understand how somebody could ask this question.
It's very simple. A claim has been made that not believing P is different from believing not P. Claims require evidence to support them. I am asking for empirical evidence to substantiate the claim because while I recognize a difference in concepts and I recognize a difference in linguistics, neither of these is disputed and neither substantiates the distinction in the objects, the difference in the neurological state that is the point of the contention.
This question. Are you saying that you then believe everything? That there's nothing you don't believe?
No. I am saying that when faced with a pair of dichotomous propositions, it would seem that pursuant to the principles of the excluded middle and non-contradiction, that one would find one of those propositions more likely to be true than the other, that one cannot find both more likely, nor can one find neither more likely. Again, this isn't a difficult concept to understand.
I think maybe the question is saying that a neurological state, maybe it's a mind, physicalism can't explain the existence of beliefs because beliefs are metaphysical things. Maybe that's what the question's getting at.
How could an absence of belief be substantiated at all is the final question. The absence of belief is demonstrated to me by the fact that I don't believe it.
Hey, that's great. The problem is that Matt provides no means by which to differentiate this absence of belief from belief to the contrary, to the shock of no one. A distinction that does not manifest in reality is indistinguishable from a distinction that does not exist, and the null hypothesis is to proceed as though something doesn't exist unless there's sufficient evidence or reason to substantiate its asserted existence. And Matt has provided none.
But also people act in accordance with their beliefs. So
that's a really good point. It just so happens that the actions of those who express non-belief in deities correspond to the actions of those who express belief in the non-existence of deities, which is why I infer from their actions that they too believe that no deity exists, even though they vehemently deny it. Well, that and because they have failed spectacularly to substantiate the claimed distinction.
So, if that would demonstrate that you're not convinced of something, but I don't understand what the point is.
I'm convinced that Matt does understand what the point is and that he is feigning ignorance.
Okay, next one. Since belief informs action and a lack of impetus for action, by what objective and independently verifiable means can we then distinguish between non-beliefs in the existence of gods and belief in the non-existence of gods? Can you guys see them clearly now?
Well, yeah, okay, it's hard to see there. So since beliefs inform actions, okay, and a lack of impetus for an action, what objective and independently verifiable means can we distinguish between non-belief in the existence of God and belief in the non-existence of God? The fact that those are two separate propositions?
No, Matt. Just no. This is conflating the object with the concept that represents the object. See my video on non-belief and apples for more on this. But the basic idea here is you picture an apple in your mind, right? The apple isn't an actual apple. I want evidence of the actual apple, not the imagined apple. Again, I recognize the conceptual difference between not believing in deities and believing there are no deities. However, the fact that we can imagine this distinction does not equate to, nor does it substantiate, the actual neurological distinction. We can imagine all sorts of things. That doesn't mean that they're real. We need empirical evidence of the object. Again, in this case, the neurological state, to substantiate the existence of the object. That is why things like gravitons, tachyons, white holes, and wormholes, and the like are hypotheticals. We can do all sorts of calculations using them, and this serves as evidence for them as concepts. However, we don't have empirical evidence to substantiate them in reality. So we can say, hey, here's an actual white hole, for example. That's why they're hypotheticals and not substantiated in reality. It's the same idea here.
To say I am not convinced X exists versus I am convinced X does not exist. This is entirely linguistic.
Did you hear that? Matt says himself, and I'm going to quote this, to say I'm not convinced X exists versus I'm convinced X does not exist, this is entirely linguistic. Remember that, because he denies it later.
Linguistic. It's the difference between I am not convinced you are guilty and I am convinced you are innocent. I don't know. The objective, independently verifiable means you don't need any.
Of course you do. I keep going back to my thought experiment. There are 3 atheists in a room. One is a Gnostic atheist who claims to know that no deity exists. The second believes that no deity exists, but refrains from making this knowledge claim, conceding that he may be mistaken. The third expresses non-belief. The first can easily be differentiated from the other two by the act of making the claim. How can we tell the other two apart? The temptation is to say, well, just ask them. But there are 5 problems with this. 1, it's not independently verifiable. 2, literally anyone can express literally any position, whether it's true or not. 3, because belief can be held without conscious awareness, as is the case with belief, biases, and so on, no one, including the subject, can know that a belief is absent, even if that is the case. 4, self-reporting is notoriously unreliable. And 5, that's just an appeal to personal anecdote. So once again, a distinction that does not manifest in reality is indistinguishable from a distinction that does not exist, and the null hypothesis to proceed as though it doesn't exist unless there's sufficient evidence or reason to substantiate its asserted existence. I need evidence of the neurological state in question.
Need any. This is by definition. There is a difference between X exists and you either believe it or you're not convinced. You're convinced of it or you're not convinced of it. And then X does not exist and you are either convinced of that proposition or not. This is just the way that propositions work.
Yes. When we're dealing with a pair of dichotomous propositions specifically, 1, we don't have justification for the presumption that one actually weighs each of those propositions independently. 2, it would seem that the degrees of credence lent to each would be indirectly proportionate to the other. That is to say, the less likely one finds one of those claims, the more likely the opposite one becomes as a result. 3, finding neither proposition to be any more likely than the other extremes highly unlikely, if not impossible, to occur in reality. And 4, an absence of belief holds no explanatory power for the actions of those who express it, whereas a subconscious belief does.
Another one which will probably be hard to decipher. How is non-belief in God... how is, then the statement, non-belief in gods does not imply belief in the non-existence of gods? Not an appeal to the excluded middle, as belief in the existence of gods and belief in the non-existence of gods do represent a proposition negation.
Yeah, I've already explained this several times, but I'll try it again because this individual seems to be very confused and is asserting that I said that it was all linguistic. When I talk...
Well, no, Matt didn't answer the question. He has replied, however, note the following. At no point has he provided an iota of empirical evidence to substantiate the asserted distinction between not believing P and believing not P. 2, at no point has he provided any independently verifiable means to differentiate between not believing P and believing not P. And 3, he is now accusing me of claiming that he said it was all linguistic, when, if you recall, his exact words, and I'll quote him again, were, To say I'm not convinced X exists versus I'm convinced X does not exist, this is entirely linguistic. It is a fact that this is what the man said. That's why I keep pressing him on the issue.
Linguistic. When I talk about something being definitional, I'm talking about how I use the terms. But the propositional logic begins with a proposition, X exists. It doesn't have to be exist, but let's say just to say this proposition, X exists. You can either be convinced of that proposition or not convinced of that proposition.
Agreed. However, propositional logic isn't empirical evidence of a distinct neurological state, nor does it provide for a way to differentiate between non-belief and belief to the contrary. This is a recurring theme from which atheists are either unwilling or unable to deviate. A claim has been made. I want evidence to substantiate that claim. It provides me with an everlasting sense of wonder how people can demonstrate such a keen understanding of the burden of proof until it's applied to their claims.
But not being convinced that X exists does not mean that you are convinced that X does not exist.
And there is the very claim that I am disputing, the claim for which I have continually asked for empirical evidence, and the claim for which no empirical evidence has ever been presented. Repeating the claim, not believing P does not mean you believe not P, will never substantiate that claim any more than repeating any God claim will substantiate it.
This is not a violation of the excluded middle. Here's the best example, maybe outside of not guilty, innocent. There is some number of blades of grass on the planet. That number is either even or it's odd. If someone makes the proposition, the number of blades of grass on the planet is even, and I say, I do not believe that, that does not mean that I am claiming that it is odd.
That's correct. It is also a red herring, because the question has absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with Gnosticism versus agnosticism, knowledge, claims, certainty, or justification. One can believe that an odd number exists without knowing, claiming to know, being certain, or being justified in that belief. And that is the point of contention. Neither the courtroom analogy nor the gumball analogy addresses this. Instead, they're red herring analogies that do not address belief. They address not knowing.
It means I am not convinced of that proposition.
Good for you. That says nothing at all about whether or not you find the opposite proposition more likely.
I hope that that clears it up, because this was really, this has just got to be a troll, because now he's saying in chat, that is also a claim, Matt. No, this is how logic works. Here's a proposition. You either accept it or you don't. If I say I'm not convinced that the number of blades of glass is even, that does not mean I am convinced that it's odd. And
that is the claim. You can argue by assertion until you're blue in the face, but not believing X does not mean believing not X absolutely is a claim. It is a declaration that something is true or factual. That is a claim, and what can be asserted without evidence can be dismissed without evidence.
It's odd, and I'm sorry if that's too difficult for you, but you can donate another $20 and I'll tell it to you again.
Nope. Not at all difficult to understand. I just want empirical evidence that it is actually true, because that's how the burden of proof works.
Another one from Matt's favorite questioner. Given that stochastic involuntarism is the prevailing view, what empirical evidence is there to support being able to willfully withhold belief, even if it is agreed that this is an ought and is the only justifiable option?
I'm going to voluntarily believe right now, as best I can, that you're not serious. And I won't be answering any more of this crap.
All right, fair enough.
Actually, I don't believe that. But I don't think that, see, here's the thing. I don't think that belief is subject to the will. I think you either believe something or you don't. You are either convinced or you're not. And this isn't a decision or choice. So this question about doxastic involuntarism, what empirical evidence is there to support being able to willfully withhold belief? I'm not sure that one can willfully withhold belief. I don't think that belief is a result is subject to will. I was just joking about I'm going to voluntarily believe you're not serious, because you probably are. But
notice now that Matt doesn't believe that beliefs are subject to the will. So stop and think about this for a second. If we agree that 1, belief is involuntary, 2, belief can be held without conscious awareness, 3, belief can be irrational and completely unjustified, and 4, we don't have the technology to positively identify specific beliefs within the human brain, then even if, for the sake of argument, we assume that a distinction does exist between non-belief and belief to the contrary, then as I keep pointing out, A, no one, including the subject, can know that a belief is absent even if it is the case, and B, we can, however, infer the presence of belief because belief informs action. Action entails the presence of belief, which is how we can distinguish willful action from inaction or reflexive behavior. Indeed, inaction is indemonstrable because as soon as you intend to demonstrate it, that intent renders it willful abstention, which is also an action. There you have it. My questions posed to Matt and his responses. Responses, not answers, because he didn't answer the questions that were asked. Notice, we never did get any empirical evidence to support the claimed distinction. We never got any independently verifiable way to tell non-belief apart from belief from the contrary. He said that it was entirely linguistic, then denied that he said it. He provided variants of the failed courtroom and gumball fallacies. And at the end of the day, we still have no good reason to think that an absence of belief in anything is actually any more than a framework devised to maintain the facade of justification while eschewing the need to actually justify anything. So until next time, even if your beliefs aren't necessarily true, remember they should be justified nonetheless.